Not sure how many NHL playoff fans we have out there, but just an amazing weekend of hockey, and often why the first round can be so exciting. We had two major upsets where Seattle beat Colorado, and then, goodness gracious, Florida beat Boston. 35-point spread between those two teams after an 82-game season. I think it's the second largest spread in the history of the game, where a team with that much discrepancy came back and beat the more favored team. So I think it was Edmonton and LA before that. But anyway, it was quite a series, right? And so how does that happen? How does a team that is clearly favored to win the game, and the pundits were saying as much, right? They were predicting a 4-game sweep. Well, what I'm going to contend is that at the beginning of that series, the Boston players, consciously or unconsciously, heard the pundits, they heard the predictions, 4-game sweep. And then when Florida won their first game, that changed the story, right? So Florida has now shown that they are capable. So then so now we're at 3-1. So now it's the expectation is that Boston will then win the series in 5 games. It'll be 4-1. And then Florida wins again. And so now we're at 3-2. And again, consciously or unconsciously, a thought that comes into the minds of those Boston players is, so now we have to make sure that we don't lose, right? So before, perhaps they were playing to win, now they are playing not to lose. What does that do for our emotional self? Well, it changes the channel, right? Because what comes up now is the fear of losing, especially when Florida wins the next game and takes the series to 3-3. Now we're going into a 7th game deciding, in the series that was supposed to only take 4 and to be incredibly lopsided. So what it does is that it puts the notion of fear in those Boston players, right? What if we lose this game and we lose the series, and then we lose everything that we thought was going to happen? So again, consciously or unconsciously, those Boston players were thinking about an outcome before it even showed up, right? So all season long, they had clearly proven that they had more skill, better strategies, better execution, better level of play than any other team in the league. They set records left, right, and center. But in this particular season, for whatever reason, those skills and abilities didn't show up. So what got in the way? When we're fearful, our emotions get in the way. What happens is, on a physiological level, our bodies release cortisol and adrenaline. Both of those hormones interfere with our capacity to perform at our best. And so the moment those Boston players became fearful of an outcome they did not expect and likely did not want, they began to interrupt their own process, their own ability to show up as their best self. Conversely, what happens for the Florida team is that going into Game 7, they're in a win-win situation, right? If they lose the game, they will be celebrated for the team that pushed Boston to a 7th game deciding the series. If they lose the game, it's what everybody expected. So, again, they would be celebrated for just getting this far. So they are truly in a win-win situation. They have absolutely nothing to lose. And when you have that kind of freedom, when you are free to fail, you have the freedom to perform at your highest level. It's just the way we work on an emotional level, right? It's the part that most coaches negate. All they focus on, most coaches, are the tangible bits, right? They focus on the skill, the training, the fitness, the strategies, all that sort of stuff, all important stuff, but they don't talk about the emotional being, the part that either chasing a win can produce or being fearful of an outcome can produce. In my second iteration as a coach, I learned from my experience as an athlete where I used to race to not lose. And it was effective sometimes until it wasn't. And then when that blew up, I knew I needed to find a better strategy as a coach. And so what I would do would be on purpose. I would discuss with the crews and certain athletes in the boat, if I felt it was necessary, what losing would actually look like and what they would make it mean. And the whole point of those conversations were to demystify the notion of losing, so that when they backed into the starting gates of a national or international regatta, the final, the last thing they were worried about was losing, because they had already imagined it, we'd already talked about it, they'd already realized that, truth be told, yeah, they could live with losing. So what that did is demystified the fear of losing. And so when they were on the starting line, they were not thinking about or worrying about losing a race. They were focused on the first stroke of the race and then the second stroke of the race and being more present. The other thing fear does is it shuts down flow state. It makes it almost impossible to get into a state of flow, because what's required for a state of flow is joy and a level of play. If you look at Florida, when they went into that 7th game, I mean, they're already on top of the world, right? They've already done what nobody thought they were going to do. So there is a level of play and joy in that team. And with that, they can more easily access a flow state and therefore a better level of play. I'll tell you, a team that is that has a nothing to lose mindset, they are potentially a very powerful team. And so it's going to be interesting to see how things move forward between Toronto and Florida, for sure. That's going to be an interesting series, because a lot of people thought it was going to be either Toronto and Boston or Boston and Tampa. And now with Boston out, I mean, it's all, who knows, right? I mean, things have been turned upside down. So it's one of the beautiful parts of hockey that I love, is that once those playoffs start, you know, anything can happen. And, you know, as they say, cliche, right? It's the Stanley Cup is the hardest cup to win in professional sport. And the first round has just proved that. They're just getting started. And many of the teams have already gone through 7 grueling games, many of them with sudden death overtime. So, yeah, I guess the message being is that you have to contend with the emotional state of a team, whether it's corporate, whether it's professional, sport, it doesn't matter. The emotions always affect our ability to perform. Okay? Enjoy your day. See you soon.